Good morning, members, officers and any members of the public who are viewing the live stream of this meeting. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Corporate Governance Committee. My name is Councillor Michael Atkins and I'm the chair of this committee. Sitting next to me is my vice chair, Councillor Peter Sanford, and I'll introduce other attendees when I invite them to speak. Those in the chamber are reminded that the meeting is being live streamed. If I can ask those joining remotely to ensure their camera and microphone remain off unless they're addressing the committee. If you're present in the room, please ensure your microphone is close to you and speak clearly when addressing the meeting. First item on our agenda today is apologies for absence. Patrick, are there any apologies for absence today?
Yes, Chair. If I could just explain that Councillor Mark Howell has been replaced by Councillor Graham Cohn on the committee, and Councillor Graham Cohn has had to give his apologies for this meeting, as has Councillor Jeff Harvey.
Thank you. I'd like to place on record my thanks, and I'm sure the committee's thanks to Councillor Howell for his work on the committee over this term, and I know he's served on it for many years in many different roles, and we're very grateful for his contributions. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Do any members have any interests to declare in relation to any item of business on this agenda? If an interest becomes apparent later in the meeting, you can also raise it at that point. Councillor Sanford and then Councillor Stobart.
Thank you, Chair. Just my usual interest as a non-remunerated director of South Cambs Limited, trading as Ermine Street Housing.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. Councillor Stobart.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if it actually comes up in the agenda, but just to make absolutely sure, I'm a board member of the two respective investment partnerships, South Cambridgeshire Investment Partnership and South Cambridgeshire Project.
Thank you, Councillor Stobart. Councillor Heather Williams.
Just on the same basis, I'm sure it's in there somewhere, the Greater Cambridge Partnership. I'm an Assembly member.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Item 3 on our agenda is the minutes of the previous meeting. Do members have any amendments relating to the accuracy of the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of January of this year? No, I'll move approval of these minutes as a true and accurate record. Second, thank you. Agreed? Fantastic. Item 4 is public questions. There have been no questions received, so we move on to the first substantive item, item 5. Item 5 is an update for the committee on the position of the 2022-23 accounts and future audits. We're joined by Mr. Maddock, Head of Finance. Could you please present this report? Thank you.
Thank you. So there's just a brief report on where we are with the accounts at the moment. We're in the process of completing the draft set for 22-23, and we're pretty much there with that now, so another couple of weeks. And we're intending that completion will be on the 31st of March 2024. There'll then need to be a public inspection period. The intention is probably that we will have to convene an additional meeting, probably the second half of May, to approve those accounts. I comment in the report that there are a significant number of authorities that aren't up to date with their accounts, but I think we know that really. We are, or have been, liaising closely with EY. They have now confirmed that they will be continuing with their value for money work on 21-22 and 22-23, and they will be providing comments on that, but what they won't be doing is carrying out their normal audit procedures. That is now clear. So effectively, we're producing a set of accounts for 21-22, which we've already done, and 22-23 that won't be subject to a full audit. It's not a completely satisfactory situation. I suspect it's really been forced upon central government to do something about the system because it had got into such a state that something drastic had to be done, and this is basically the drastic approach is that they set a backstop date of the 30th of September 2024 for all outstanding accounts up to and including the 31st of March 2023. So we will potentially have a disclaimer on our accounts, which basically means that the auditors can't give an opinion because they've done no work. I think the important thing will be is that all the disclaimers that are issued are consistent with each other and make it clear the reason for that disclaim. And I'm assured that that will be the case when this all comes around. So I had a meeting with KPMG towards the end of last week to try and get a bit more clarity about what they're going to be doing for the 23-24 accounts. So they are intending to do a full audit on the 23-24 transactions, but they are saying they won't be doing an audit of the opening balances. So potentially for 23-24 accounts, we will, whilst we'll have that full audit on the transaction in the year, there will need to be some form of wording within the opinion that says that they haven't done anything on the 22-23 opening balances. Again, it's unclear exactly what sort of form of wording that will be. But again, I think it's the same situation that most authorities are going to find themselves in, simply because there just isn't enough time to catch up with the outstanding years and also make sure they do 23-24 on time. The backstop date for 23-24 was going to be 31st of March. It's actually been shifted to the 31st of May, but I've agreed with KPMG that they will complete the 23-24 audit by the 31st of March 2025, because we would then run the risk of it affecting the 24-25 accounts closure process. Having spoken to them at length, I think we're fairly satisfied that that is enough time to complete the work that they need to do. They're starting their audit from the first week of November. I think I reported it was going to be October, but they confirmed that would now be the first week of November. And I know we've got Christmas in December, but they've effectively got 5 months in which to complete the audit, which should really be enough. So that's sort of where we are. I know we said in the minutes I would be producing a timeline. I think I've probably got enough information now to produce a timeline, so I will do that as soon as I can. So that's where we are. I mean, the only other thing that they said that I thought was quite interesting was that they're not expecting the legislation to be passed until June, which is, again, seems a very long time, but at least we'll have some clarity, and we do all know what's going to happen. So it's not as if we just sit on our hands. We can prepare for that and prepare for the backstop date of 30th September, which I don't believe we'll have any issue with meeting. So if there's any questions on that at this point?
Thank you, Mr. Maddock. We might split this up a little because there was quite a lot of detail there covering. No, it's really helpful. So I guess perhaps if we take any comments and questions first of all on the sort of outstanding, quote unquote, sort of late audits of 21, 22 and 22 and 23. And then later let's move the discussion on to the forthcoming audit of 23, 24 with KPMG. So are there any questions about the outstanding 2 years and the processes we are following? I'll take Councillor Heather-Williams and then Councillor Leaming.
Thank you. Not so much of a question, more of a comment. I think the reason, or part of the reason, why we are in the situation we are with those is because EY have repetitively failed to give appropriate resource, and the resource that was needed. You know, we've seen lots of delays, not through the council. I mean, don't get me wrong, everyone has a part to play, but the fact that they didn't have enough resources over, for example, the summer, that's led to delays. And I have sat on this committee now since 2018, and I'd be very rich if I had money for every time they said, we haven't got the resources or we're having to delay. And so I do hold them at least partially responsible for why our residents aren't getting an audit for these accounts. And I hope that when it goes forward, at the end of the day, EY are going to be bidding, and I would strongly suggest that this council points out our experience of EY and formalises our experience of EY so that those that are doing the tender process know exactly what you get if you give a contract to EY.
Thank you for that, Councillor Williams. Councillor Leaming.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to ask whether EY will be billing us for the non-audits.
That's an excellent question. Mr Maddock?
So I have had a discussion with them about this because I made this point some time ago. They will be billing us based on the work that they've done. That's what they've said to me. Now, all they've done is really the value for money work, which they haven't completed. So I would expect a substantially reduced bill for both 21-22 and 22-23. Now, we haven't had that in writing, but I think perhaps I'll request something in writing from them around exactly what work they've done and how much it's going to cost us, because quite clearly they've not put the resources in for those 2 years that they have done in previous years.
Thank you. Perhaps it would be helpful as well to speak to other district and local councils that are in a similar position on what their auditors are charging for their value for money work only, and we can make sure that we are in a reasonable place in terms of the fee that they charge us. I wonder whether there will be guidance issued on this matter. And did you say it was July that the government's going to be issuing this legislation?
So we're expecting it in June. I have received some feedback in relation to the cost of providing a disclaimer. So I do think it's something I probably need to pick up with EY, because they suggested in a public meeting at another authority that providing a disclaimer wasn't straightforward and that there was an amount of time involved in providing that. Now, I'm not really sure about that, if I'm honest. So I think I probably need to, as part of the discussions, I probably need to find out, well, okay, if you're providing a disclaimer, what exactly is involved? So I think there is a little bit of concern there that we might get.
If it's the standard wording that's going to be issued to multiple public bodies, I'm not sure how much work there would be involved in drawing that up.
And I tend to agree, so I think that's something I need to pick up with them to find out exactly what actual work is involved.
Thank you. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify that last point, are we expecting the disclaimer to come from EY or from central government? And if the latter, should we note there's a possible risk, if there's a general election in the meantime, that the work may get pushed back?
So the disclaimer will need to be issued by EY. I'm expecting the sort of general form of the disclaimer to be something that comes out from the legislation. So it'll be something that they will provide. I'm hoping based on an agreed approach amongst all of from central government, that will be the same for each authority. Okay.
But just to build on that point, presumably there are still some risks associated with this delay, this gap now between now and the legislation being laid in June. But I guess at the same time, it's a sector-wide rather than an us-specific issue. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, so with anything like this, there's always a risk that when the legislation gets agreed, it's slightly different to what we're assuming. To me, if something drastic did change, then I think the whole catch-up programme is probably out the window if we have to wait till June. So I think everybody in the sector is assuming that it's going to turn out as has been proposed. There seems to be a degree of confidence about that, at least.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Can I just clarify the value for money work for 21-22 and 22-23? Will that be two separate reports, or will that be one kind of sort of omnibus report?
I believe it's going to be one report that covers both years. again, I can check that point, but that's my understanding.
I mean, I think given that a reasonable amount of material would be copied between the two in any case, that would make sense. And sorry, you said that they're carrying out work on that at the moment. Have they flagged any kind of urgent risks to you as head of finance that have emerged as a result of that work?
They haven't particularly flagged any risks. I think the work is quite drawn out because I think there's going to be some work around the 4-day week and the final report that we produce. So I'm not expecting the value for money report to come until, well, obviously the July is the next scheduled meeting, so I'm expecting it to be available for that meeting.
Thank you. Is there anything else on the outstanding audits before I move on to the brave new world of 23-24 and KPMG? No. Well, I might just kick off this section. So you've clarified that KPMG won't be doing any work on the opening balances, which on reflection does make sense because that would essentially involve doing 2 audits, you know, and sort of gets us back to sort of where we started. But I wonder, perhaps something for Mr. Tully to consider, is there any support that internal audit could provide in terms of when we have the finalised kind of closing balances, as it were, for 22-23, given that those won't be looked at, but that any issues with them could have kind of cascading effects? Could we commission a sort of perhaps quite a limited scope of work around kind of key risk areas for internal audit, just to kind of have a once-over, which is not in any way to undermine my confidence in Mr. Maddock's team, but, you know, more eyes are always beneficial. I wonder what do you think to that suggestion, Mr. Tully?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can see some merit in that. I think it's probably worth Peter and I taking that way and having a discussion, thinking about what some of those key risks could be and what would be some of the best areas to take assurance on. So I'm happy to have that conversation with Peter.
Thank you. That would be excellent. My only other question on this was just to clarify what our expectations of KPMG. So if they've not got any kind of confidence or can't draw any assurance on the opening balances, should we therefore expect kind of qualified opinions for the 23-24 audit? So it'll be sort of, you know, reasonable assurance, you know, but for the opening balances, etc., etc. Is that the sort of place we're heading to here?
I'm hoping it'll be a little bit better than reasonable assurance. I mean, to be honest, I don't know, and I don't say when I was talking to KPMG last week, they weren't entirely clear how this would pan out. I mean, I suppose it's probably only for 1 year because the way it sort of works, by the time you've audited your 23-24 transactions, those then become the closing balances. So it's sort of a 1 year sort of stopgap. I think, again, it might be useful for me to get a bit more clarity on that if I can, but I'm not sure I can at the moment. But in principle, they suggested there would need to be some form of wording just to make it clear that they hadn't done any work on the opening balances.
Thank you. I mean, to some extent, though, I mean, they'll have to do quite a bit of work on the closing balances and on the transactions, which you do think kind of take one from the other and you're back where you started. But I appreciate that's not quite the same thing in all cases. Are there any questions about the future work with KPMG in the next round of audits after that? Councillor Leeming.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to ask, have they given any idea of the way that they are going to audit, how they're going to do this work? They're starting in the first week in November. When will they begin substantive testing? Will their work in November be sort of risk-focused and scoping? Have they given any indication about whether they will come and actually visit us here in South Cambs?
So they have said that they will come into the office, and they've said they will have some time at the start of the audit and at the end of the audit. They seem fairly flexible around visiting the offices, and they certainly share my view that you can clear up queries a heck of a lot quicker on a face-to-face meeting than sending loads of emails. So at least they're on the same page with that. Sorry, what's the first question?
I was asking about whether they've given you any idea of how they will work. Do they have a sort of risk-focused and then substantive testing focus, and how are they going to arrange their time? When they start work in November, do you know what their initial work will be and what we should be preparing for?
So they have actually already been doing some work on, we've provided a lot of information, but then with any new auditor you would do that anyway. They're going to be doing some of the walkthroughs. I'm not sure where we've quite got through the walkthroughs. So the walkthroughs are system audits where they follow a transaction all the way through just to see if it... my understanding is that they will have done a lot of that work in advance, and that they would say they're already doing some of that work. So my expectation is that when they come in November, they'll be ready to start the full audit with their sample testing. And from the conversations I've had, I think the approach between audit firms is generally similar. I haven't gone into a lot of detail so far about the work, but they're certainly intending to come in on site first couple of weeks of November, start the sort of getting the samples together, do some of the testing, and hopefully we can get through that within the first couple of months. And if we can, I think that it will mean that we'll be finished by the end of March without too much trouble, I would hope.
Thank you. And I have one more question, which is to do with, it's a thing that has caused problems for us in previous audits, which is, but both areas of the work involve third parties. So our valuation and our pension valuation. What have they asked us to do in regards to those particular areas of the accounts? Because they are things where we've had deliberations and discussions that have held things up in the past.
So it's an interesting one, this, because CIPFA are also consulting on some changes to the accounting code. And the two areas they're looking at are, in fact, pensions and valuations. Now, there's a lot of time and effort goes into both of those areas, and they're both very subjective. I'm not 100% convinced that the time that's previously been put into from the auditors warrants it, if I'm honest. Now, it sounds that CIPFA are going to relax some of the requirements. So, for example, the valuations, at the moment, we're doing full valuations every year. I believe, from what KPMG was saying last week, was that there's an intention to move to perhaps more indexation type valuations, which should probably take less time. There also, I think there is a recognition that there's a lot of information in the accounts around pensions, and almost disproportionately compared to other parts of the accounts. So I think there's possibly going to be some relaxation about some of that as well, which should reduce the amount of preparation time and the amount of auditing time. But watch this space, I think.
Is CIPFA going to issue guidance on this over the
Yes.
summer? Will this potentially be in the same piece of legislation that comes with the how to manage the outstanding accounts?
So this will, because it's the professional accounting body, it'll come through a slightly different route, but the intention is for that to be aligned. I must admit, I haven't had a chance to have a look at some of the proposals, but this was based on a conversation I had with KPMG, and they obviously have had a chance to look. So I think that it sounds like a proportionate response to me from CIPFA. Well, I'd hope it would be anyway, but it does sound like a proportionate response, and hopefully this will aid the process and mean that a few less weeks spent on assets and pensions by the auditors.
Thank you, Mr. Maddock.
Thank you. Yeah, just to kind of build on that a little, those two areas feel quite different to me, in the sense that obviously for valuations we do have, investment properties kind of held for value, and the value of those is quite important. And I can see that in the case of some local authorities, fortunately not ours, issues around misvaluing or purchasing investment properties at the wrong time have caused kind of serious kind of financial issues at some other councils. So I'm not necessarily opposed to a sort of healthy amount of work. I mean, as you know, as we all know, property valuations here in Cambridge are pretty robust, and so it's unlikely to be a kind of, very unlikely to cause any significant issues for the council. But I think that is an area where, I say, reflecting on some of the issues with other councils, that time spent there is not necessarily wasted. But I have no understanding as to the work spent on the pensions issue, particularly as we are not the, we don't manage or hold the investment of the pension fund, and that is presumably itself separately audited and checked in any case. So my understanding is very much that we more or less get a phone call that says, the value of your pension liability is this, and here's the information you need to put in your accounts, and that's sort of handed to us, and that's sort of the beginning and the end of the story. So I think that those would be my reflections, I guess, on those two issues. But we can pick those up with KPMG when they begin their work. Are there any other comments on the future audits? And I'll work with KPMG. No? Well, thank you very much. We've been asked to note that report. Thank you very much for your contributions, and thank you, Mr. Maddock. Agenda item 6 is updates to the committee on topical news items around corporate governance risk and some of the assurance work that's been going on. Could I please invite Mr. Tully to present this report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members of the committee. This is our regular quarterly update on topical governance, risk and control matters in the council, with content both from myself and from Peter's team. It feels like quite a comprehensive report, I think, this quarter. Hope you find it useful as ever. We're starting on page 13 of your agenda packs. Just to talk about some of the key highlights in the report. First of all, from the internal audit side, we've completed 2 reviews in the most recent period. Safeguarding modern slavery, which had full assurance, and also procurement declarations of interest, which had reasonable assurance. National Fraud Initiative, we recently extracted and processed data for the annual National Fraud Initiative exercise. That review does provide assurance that the data quality is good on our systems, and that's also been used for the county-wide fraud initiative, which we refer to later on in the report, where there's been some very good performance indeed about recovery. On page 18, one thing I do want to bring to attention is just the new global internal audit standards have been published at the beginning of the year in January. We're maintaining our compliance with the existing standards whilst these ones are being implemented globally. So it's important, we make sure in the team we continue our continuous professional development and continue to implement improvements. I think what we need to do is try and understand what the most sensible route is for assessment and compliance with the new standards. We've already started preparing for that, but there are still some unknowns. One thing for us at this stage, we don't know if they're going to be supplementary public sector standards. We had those last time. The general feeling is there won't be, but we're still waiting for some things to be finalised. So we're staying on top of that, and we'll keep you updated with progress. For this committee, the independent member is a report we've brought to you previously. Following the most recent Civic Affairs meeting, we've been progressing with that recruitment. We've got a whole recruitment pack set up, good to go. And Peter's the recruiting manager, and I'm working with him on that. Hopefully an advert will be going live soon. We've put a little timeline in the pack just so you can see where we are. We're hoping to get someone who we're lucky in post for the new municipal year. Moving on from that, we go into the report where we have the section of sort of counter-fraud highlights and updates. Some of the highlights there we've got there is just to be aware of some of the comms we've got on fraud awareness, very good. That's been promoted, and hopefully you've seen that on the websites. We've also included some good examples of fraud preventative work. Obviously, we can be preventative and stop it happening in the first place. That's the best place to be. So it's useful to demonstrate how there's been an increase in that work, I think. The Council Tax Counter Fraud Initiative, I mentioned that earlier on, as we've used the NFI data for that. Been some very positive results with savings in the region of 477,000, so that's very positive. And then finally, what we always just like to do for the committee is include updates, training development for your awareness, and we've got 3 items there, one on treasury management, one on sector risk, and one on offlog. So I hope you find that a useful update. If you've got any comments or questions, happy to take those.
Thank you, Mr. Tully. A very comprehensive report. Questions and comments, please. Councillor Williams.
Thank you. You mentioned there in your introduction, and it's in the report, about savings in relation to fraud. Now, I fully support the efforts made to tackle fraud, but I think really it should be monies retrieved, because they're not savings. This is money that should never have gone into those people's hands. You know, they have defrauded the council, so it's not a saving, it's money retrieved back that should never have left us, or who they are. And I just think if we say savings, it sort of sounds like we're doing some budget exercise where actually there's a moral responsibility for people not to attempt to defraud the taxpayer, but equally for us to pursue that. So I think retrieving what is the taxpayers is better than savings, in my view, because I don't see it as those. I see it as people that have tried their luck on a lot of occasions, and they shouldn't. Morally, they shouldn't. So that was on that. The other thing, and I've raised it previously in relation to training, and my concerns around with the reduced hours, availability to training, and also how we are ensuring that people are up to date. You know, we employ people on the basis of a certain qualification. How are we ensuring that their CPD is up to date and actually they still have that qualification? And we did have a conversation where actually, as a council, we weren't following that up and we weren't seeing that. We've now had the peer review report that does identify training as a bit of a red flag and an issue. Is there anywhere in the foreseeable future where we could have this looked into as there have been other things? I realise there's been a surface check, but I do think it's something that warrants really the same merit as we do for some of these other things.
Thank you. Mr. Tully, and I'll come to Councillor Stobart in a minute.
Thank you. Just on the savings, I probably agree with you on that in terms of wording. I'll be happy to agree with that comment, so that's quite simple. Yes, and on the other one, you know, we're already doing some sort of work looking into sort of CPD and training of officers at the council, so I take on board your comments there as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, and perhaps as part of that work, I mean, this may be what you covered previously, but I think Councillor Williams' point, particularly around those with professional qualifications, where we're relying on those, it could be relatively straightforward to identify the council staff who fall in that category, which won't, I think, necessarily be an enormous number. Yes, I will leave that to your judgment as how best to progress that. And I also agree about some slightly stronger language about the recovery of monies that are rightfully the public's. Councillor Stobart, please.
Chair, thank you. So I just wanted to pick up on the point that Councillor Heather Williams made about training and the subsequent discussion. And then I've got a few questions about the other items in the report. So if I just go through them and then please stop me if it's too much. So on professional qualifications, it is important, of course, that people who are, for example, pursuing corporate membership of an institution, something like that, are offered every encouragement by their employer. And so I think, you know, from my experience, including that in the staff appraisal, and also I believe the council offers to certain employees financial support for subscriptions. Now, they can be a challenge, you know, particularly early in career, and I would sort of encourage that view of professional qualifications, that there isn't, in a sense, an artificial barrier imposed, and that managers would be responsive to that need for maybe a training assignment, you know, that is needed to reach a certain gateway in professional qualification. So I think they're all, in a sense, they're risk factors. You know, the quality of the workforce has to be maintained, and I think it is a meeting between the individual and their supervisors. So just that was more a comment, and I hope a supportive one. On page 18, under continuous improvement, of course, this is a lot about training and qualifications. I did have a detailed question about Power Query and Power BI, which kind of pop out, and I really would value a kind of brief explanation of what they are and their implications. Just flicking through the rest of the report. I'm just going to dwell briefly on the preventative work, and I think Councillor Williams already brought that up. But, you know, when we are applying, in a sense, processing checks on applications for things, what do we put in place to ensure that we get very low false positives? In other words, a very good rate of picking up on fraudulent behaviour, and at the same time, a very low false negative, so that, you know, people who are worthy don't get kind of rejected at the first stage, which can be very demoralising and in fact may leave some vulnerable people in a bad place. So I think that's my second question. And then the documents you've recommended, Mr. Tully, are excellent. The Guide on Treasury Management talks about something we have touched on in the past, which is where the interests of audit and scrutiny and overview combine. And I would commend it to the rest of the committee to read that report and reflect on it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stobart. I also have some comments about Power Query and Power BI, but I will let you answer the rest of Councillor Stobart's questions first.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so there are two Microsoft Office products which we have. The first one, Power Query, is a very good data analytics tool which is built into Microsoft Excel, although it's effectively sort of a standalone application. And it's a very good way for building queries, and especially repetitive queries. So if you want to load a data set into it once and you build up your analysis and query on it, you can refresh it and load data sets in again and again and again. So that's quite an efficient way of doing it. It's also a very good way, we've been using it to do data quality checking of the data in the first place. It definitely highlights any potential anomalies and things like that. So that's the first part of that tool, and it's very useful in our toolbox as auditors to get through a lot of data quickly. And in some scenarios, rather than doing sample-based testing, it can potentially enable us to do whole system testing, get through a lot of data very, very quickly, and that improves the level of assurance we can provide. So that's why we've been very much investing our training in that area. The second one is the Power BI. Now, this is more of a sort of graphical illustration tool which can be used to provide charts and all kinds of wonderful tools of ways to communicate and illustrate the data that you've got. It goes a little bit beyond just using standard charts and tools like Microsoft Excel and things like that, but it is much the same thing. Where it's been very helpful and where we've used it recently is trying to look at data and how it's been dispersed across a geographical area. And you can see patterns and trends by putting sort of addresses in by postcode. And it really just helps you look at the data through a different lens, perceive it in a different way, and that provides further insight. So again, quite another useful tool for us to be skilled up on. So I hope that answers your questions on those two. That's fine.
May I, Chair, through you, comment that, yeah, doing whole data is great as opposed to sampling. And I think things like it enables you to pick up outliers and so on, things that may be indicative of issues in the data and so on. Anyway, I won't go any further than that, but commend the approach.
I'm happy to progress or come back to your questions on. Okay, fantastic, thank you. So the next question was around identifying false positives, false negatives. So a good example of this for members of the committee is when we're doing the National Fraud Initiative, we are loading a lot of data into the system and it's doing a lot of matches. The data gets matched according to their protocols and routines, and it's sort of the best fit across the whole sort of United Kingdom, really. When those data matches come back, we want them to all be good quality. If they're not good quality and it's identifying something that could be wrong but it's not, that's what's known as a sort of a false sort of positive, because it's shown up as a positive match but there's nothing there to investigate. So we want to try and reduce those as much as possible, and false negative being the reverse of that. I think the challenge we've got with those systems is that it is definitely based on national sort of matches and their algorithms best designed to suit that. So although it is helpful, it's no substitute for our own local intelligence. And when we look at the data, we'll make our own sort of supplementary risk appraisal based on the information that's provided back to us. Dan, is there anything you want to add on that from your side of fraud?
Yeah, just to add to that and sort of relate to this, the fraud team are doing a lot more, are going to be doing a lot more on preventative work. Our fraud manager's been engaging with central government around some of the things that are coming from there, around assessing fraud risk, the impact of fraud on systems, and making sure all of our council systems are as fraud-proof as they possibly can be. And I think it's probably fair to say that central government probably learned from the COVID crisis and some of the grants processes, and there was quite a bit of feedback around perhaps not as much was put into the fraud side of things. So I think there's a lot coming forward from central government about good practice, about making sure that all your systems are as fraud-proof as they possibly can. So we're going to be directing a lot of our work in the next couple of years just to make sure that our systems are as fraud-proof as they possibly can be. So I think that's a bit of a watch this space. And that work's already started. We've done some work with housing in recent weeks, and that'll continue across the authority over the next couple of years, I would suspect.
Just a brief comment on those two things, the national versus the local. That's an intriguing and important kind of distinction to make, because we recognise there are peculiarities in our district. So that's going to be a challenge, I think, for the future, because of course local is maybe better, but local is less data, and that means things like if you're even thinking about doing something like machine learning, it would be tricky to have a good local system. So I'm glad you're recognising that, but I think there's a challenge, inherent challenge in handling that distinction, if you will.
Yes, well, perhaps one could sort of train your data on as much national data as you can, and then feed it the local stuff and see what it makes of it. I think, yeah, there's some interesting learning around that. Thank you. My brief comment is just on the Power Query issue, which is something that I've used quite a lot professionally, and I certainly welcome its adoption by the team, and I think it's an excellent use of time for sort of training in these tools. I guess, as I'm sure you're aware, the only risk I think with these is that although most use of Microsoft Excel is somewhat misuse and not used very well and not always the best tool for the job, there is a sort of general understanding of how it works, and there's a general ability to figure out what's going on at a relatively surface level, whereas as you move to these more advanced tools, it becomes more necessary to document the steps that are being taken and in a way that can be kind of passed on. And you don't want to end up with kind of single points of failure where there's one person who built this quite complex sort of 30-step kind of query, and if it's not, Power Query does a reasonable job of doing it kind of step by step and working out what happens, but even so I think some additional documentation around these models is probably also a worthwhile investment of time. So that was my only comment on that. Councillor Leeming, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about the internal audit review of modern slavery. So in the notes, thank you, it says that there will be a training presentation which will be rolled out to staff and partner agencies. Do you have a timescale of when that would be? I'd also like to ask whether, when you undertook this work, whether you took any advice from the police and their expertise in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So the first one about the training, the action itself will have a timescale for implementation. So I can happy to take that away and get back to you on that one. With the police, from the audit side, we didn't engage with the police, but it is quite possible that the actual team itself, which is leading on modern slavery, did engage with them. Again, I'd have to take that away and get back to you, but I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we, sorry, just to butt in, can we make sure that training is also made available to members as well as staff? Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Leeming.
No more questions, thank you. Other than that, I really recommend. I'm very pleased to see this has been undertaken, because I sit on the police and crime board with another hat on, and it is an issue that's raised, and I'm glad to see that we are proactive about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything, Mr. Tully, that we need to know, particularly, I guess, about the medium actions that came out of these two reviews that you completed in the last quarter?
Yes, sure, I'm happy to talk to those. I think both medium actions on these fronts, they're not so much about the impact, it's more about the timing. So, for example, on the modern slavery one thing that we agreed with the teams that it would be very good to reflect this on our risk register. That was something we wanted to do sooner rather than later, that's why it's a medium action, not because it's a big impact. In fact, we can see that coming up later on the agenda today. It's been added to that. So it was just really about the timing of trying to get these implemented as quickly as possible. Nothing more than that.
Thank you, that's helpful clarity. I think final point for me, sorry I've been butting in all over the place. The Audit Committee independent member, I don't want to delay the process at all, but if the advert is in a kind of draft near finish state, could it be shared please with members of the committee? Maybe just give us a week or so to look at it. Like I said, I don't want to add an unnecessary delay, but I think it would be appropriate for us just to review the advert and check it is also matching our understanding of what is happening. Councillor Leeming?
Thank you, Chair. Is this something that could get tangled up with the general election, the advertisement of this independent member, or is it going to be outside the scope of that?
We might take some advice on that. My sense would be I can't see why it would be, but always best to get advice as we run up. And there are obviously elections happening locally in May that we need to, even if they're not in our district, we do need to have some awareness of those. But yes,
Chair, we will all enter the regulated period because of the police and crime, even though we haven't got local elections.
Indeed.
So we will be in regulated period.
Yes. So yeah, let's take some advice as to whether we need to bear that in mind either for May or indeed for a general election at some point. But yes, if we could just have a quick once over of the advert would be much appreciated. Thank you. Are there any final comments on this report before I move on? No, thank you. We've been asked to note and discuss the report, and we have done so. Thank you very much, Mr. Tully. Agenda item 7 is the 6 monthly strategic risk report. Mr. Bird, who joins us online, will present this report. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. This is the 6 monthly strategic risk report. It's normally presented by Kevin Ledger, but he's unavailable today, so he's asked me to step in. As I said, we produce this report every 6 months, and it's the strategic risks. So it's the risks that are considered most important to the council as a whole. So there is a process in place that escalates risks from services and projects and programs onto this list, and this is the list that is owned and managed by our leadership team. What the report shows, I won't go through it word for word, but what the report shows in paragraph 3 are the steps that we've taken since it was last brought to this committee in October, where we've shared it with our corporate management team, our leadership team, and we've made the necessary amendments and additions, as Mr. Tully alluded to earlier. What we've also want to show in this report is on paragraph 5, a summary of all of those additions and changes that we've made to the risk. Now, the purpose of bringing it to this committee is to show that there is governance and risk management, not to specifically interrogate individual risks. But what I wanted to do is give you a flavour of the type of work that's been going on behind the scenes and show you clear examples of ongoing monitoring and upkeep of this list. Paragraph 6 will show you how the risk score is calculated. So there is a brief summary of that here, where we show the impact of each risk and the likelihood of each risk, and that gives you an overall risk score. And then that's when mitigating factors are considered, and the overall score is the residual risk score after the mitigating factors have been taken into account. And the risk log at Appendix A will show all the risks that we have on the risk register, but in order of the total residual score. So you'll get what we consider to be the most important or the most impactful at the top of the list. So that gives you a clear idea of exactly what we consider to be the biggest risks. We take this risk register to LT regularly for them to go through it, and obviously, as I said, as part of our ongoing policy and performance work, we engage with all service areas, all service plans, all project plans and programs to make sure that any high scoring risks after mitigating factors have been taken into account are then escalated and brought forward onto this particular strategic risk, so that we have a clear view of what we consider to be the highest risks in the council. That's it, Chair. Obviously happy to take any questions on the report, and if there are questions on specific risks, I would ask that you allow me to take those back to the risk owner and get a response for you there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bird, for that overview. Any comments or questions on this? Councillor Heather Williams.
Sorry, I'll start with on page 36. Now, I raised this at full council in relation to the MRF contract, and it does say about sort of reputational impact and potential impact to income and what have you, but there doesn't seem to be anything financial as a control measure, and at the end of the day, unless there's been an update, which there may have been since full council, other councils have budgeted, I think Huntingdon was 900,000 for potential increase. We haven't budgeted anything, and that just doesn't seem to be taken into consideration really as a control measure of risk. So I think we need more on that to understand how it's got from 16 to 8, because obviously I'd say it's quite high risk to the budget if we end up in the same way as Huntingdon have budgeted. Then when it comes to the risk registers on the 4-day week, we have we have a risk for actually for the trial to be stopped early, or for the return to 5-day working to be early. And yet we can see from the staffing employment reports that actually the risk is the longer it carries on, the harder it is to go back. So we seem to have conflicting comments between the two committees. Also, something that I've raised before, Chair, is quality of work. How do we assess the fact that actually, yes, targets are met, applications might be dealt with in time, bins collected, but actually the pressure that is put on people to do it in less hours means it's a poorer quality of work. Not because they're not capable of doing high quality work, but the intensity that is those working arrangements, which we already know some have opted out from. How are we checking that? There seems to be no consideration of quality. Again, no risk for reputational issues, but surely we can all agree that one way or another, reputation of this council is being questioned at national level. And yeah, I mean, why in staffing employment do we have that it's a risk for the trial to continue, and yet in the risk register, it's a risk if it's stopped? I mean, you could argue that there's a risk either way, but why is one being included and not the other? So I don't feel that the 4-day week, again, training should be in here. Can't see it. I mean, it's just the risks attached to the 4-day week trial are not being adequately covered in this risk register, again.
Thank you, Councillor Heather Williams. I'm very aware that this is a very politically sensitive topic. I think it's appropriate for Mr. Bird to take your comments away back to the risk owners and consider if they've been fully reflected. I don't quite, however, perhaps you could explain your contrast between what is said and staffing and employment and what is said here. Is the point being made at staffing and employment not that if the trial continues, there are more risks associated with it then stopping, and the stopping is the risk. The risk is that they're highlighting is surely that the longer it goes on, the greater the potential impact if it then stops. Have I understood that correctly?
Chair, so here we have a risk factor for it being stopped prematurely. Okay, that's the risk that's in this risk register. And yet in the report to Staffing and Employment Committee, it said how there was a risk for the trial and for 4-day working to continue, because the longer it goes on, the harder it is then to bring people back. And yet the risk in the risk register is a risk of stopping it, whereas at staffing employment, the risk is it continuing. So while there might be merits and things on both sides, only one has been factored in the risk register, and actually I think there is a high risk of the longer it continues, the harder it is to revert back. Now, people may agree or disagree whether that's a risk worth taking, and that's a political decision, but looking at the risk register itself, the absence of that, I think, is a great concern.
I understand. So it's essentially what you're saying is there are risks involved with the trial if the trial is stopped prematurely, and or if it is, but your point is that if it is stopped at some future point, not prematurely. So perhaps, Mr. Bird, you could take away the comment that risk around it being stopped prematurely perhaps doesn't cover the full range of risks, depending on whether it is or is not stopped. I agree, perhaps a little more detail there would be beneficial. Are there any further comments? Councillor Stobart.
Chair, thank you. So first of all, a general comment on the way the risks are presented. It's very clear and very helpful that we can see the risk in, summarised, and its impact and probability, and the mitigation steps that are taken. I think that makes for a clear reading. I just have no comments, if you will, about the parallel process, if you will. So composing the risk register is an important, reasonable step. We talked about the escalation from, in a sense, departmental level to a corporate level of risk. That's most appropriate. But what's the life cycle of a risk? You've talked about that escalation process, but once it's on the strategic risk register, is it, for example, reviewed at scheduled leadership team meetings? Is that evaluation of risk dealt with on an event basis? So there's an event, a report published, a letter received, whatever, which in a sense then triggers an evaluation of the risk. How does that happen? And I just wanted to add one point here. A risk register should be dynamic, and we should be thinking, well, some risks are coming off because we've managed them down to the base, to a level where they can be handled again at departmental level. And some risks, if they persist, might, for example, point to some kind of structural issue at the council that we need to address. We need to allocate more resources to handling. So the two questions are, how are risks considered day to day? And secondly, how do we, in a sense, capture and encourage a dynamic approach to risk, where risks are moving around, they're being managed down, and so on. I hope that's clear. I've rambled a little bit, but they're my two comments for the moment, or questions for the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Stobart. Councillor Bird, can you say anything about the kind of more about the full life cycle of how these risks are moved up and down and on and off the corporate register?
Certainly, and that's one of the problems we identified with our old risk system for risk, was that they weren't, there wasn't the agreed lifespan, or as you said, Councillor Stobart, a dynamic approach to risk management. So what we do now is we manage them much more closely. We've got specific individuals or a team within the council now that look at risks regularly and monitor them. They update and remove risks that are on the risk register as well as escalations to it, so identify new ones. We've introduced a process of a direction of travel, so that we know if a risk score is increased or decreased from one from from when it's published to the next time it's reviewed, or if it's new, or if it actually is going to be no longer on that list. We show that it's going to be removed at the next one. So we do monitor that movement of risks, if you like. We've also spent a lot of time in making sure that people are aware that they own their own risks. Before, I think there was a lack of ownership, if I may say that. And I think certainly around project and program management, we've made a big step forward in making sure that project managers and program managers review their risks regularly at project meetings and at program meetings, so that there is this dynamic approach, and we do make sure that risks are moved around, because we don't want there to just go stale, if you like, and just to sit on a risk register and nobody look at them. And I think we've made great steps forward. We do one could see this as a disadvantage, but at the moment we haven't got a risk management software system in place. So we're actually doing this on an Excel spreadsheet by hand, which isn't great in many ways, and we are looking for improvements in that. But what it does give us is a real hands-on approach to risk management that we didn't have before. So as I said, we are looking at them more regularly. We've got ownership agreed right from service level through projects, programs, right up to LT. As I mentioned earlier, leadership team actually own the strategic risk register, and it is on the forward plan regularly for them to review it. And as I say, we've introduced a direction of travel so that we know whether or not a risk score, a residual score, has increased, decreased, whether it's a new, or whether it will come off the next publication. I hope that answers your questions.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bird, for the answer. That's reassuring. What do we continue to need to do, though, to consolidate that view of risk in the council's working culture?
That's a very good question. I think ownership of risks has been very important. There wasn't that, as I said, ownership of risks. And I think part of that ownership is that we've worked very closely, Kevin and I, to make sure that risks are visual and appear on service plans. So that previously we've had service plans that say this is what we're going to achieve in the next year, or what the steps that we're going to take in the next year, and that's been very clear and precise. And we've monitored the delivery of a service plan, and we've monitored how that impacts on the delivery of the business plan. But we've widened the approach of the service planning this year to include risk management, also transformation and equalities. So it's there in black and white, and the service manager is responsible for managing that service plan as well as delivering the outcomes.
Through you, Chair, it sounds as though, Mr. Bird, you're doing what is reasonable in the circumstance to encourage that kind of evaluation, appreciation of risk. I think, yeah, let's see how it goes. Thank you for the report.
Thank you.
Chair, I had just one or two more detailed questions on the risks themselves. So if I might, and this might require some homework. So on page 36, risk SR11, it was simply, just glancing down that list, I looked at this thing called data maturity self-assessment, and I thought, what is that? I wondered if you might get back to us on what a data maturity self-assessment is, and whether that's got implications, whether the committee, might be interested in the outcome of that self-assessment. And then just going one down to SR12, the implementation of the asset management strategy, of course, is huge, because it's, amongst other things, looking at reducing the carbon cost of, all the council-owned homes, and presumably touches also on Ermine Street. So I just wondered if somewhere we should be digging into that in a little more detail because of its significance to the council. So that's a kind of a general question. Should we be coming back to that? Perhaps, Chair, that's I don't know whether that's a scrutiny question or just a matter of a report from Peter Campbell and I think it's Alex Snelling-Day on how that's going. But it just leapt out of the page as I was reading through. Yeah.
Thank you. I think perhaps that's a scrutiny question, but if you could take those comments away, Mr. Bird, and liaise with the risk owners, that would be much appreciated. Unless you wish to share with us what a data maturity self-assessment is off the top of your head, but you may wish to revert back to us.
I'll come back to you if I may, Chair.
Thank you. Any Councillor Leeming, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've noted that one of the new risks which has been added to the paper is actually a very high one, which is the spare me, it's this one. It's the SR32, the increased need for temporary accommodation, bed and breakfast accommodation. And I've seen that that's been added as a new risk, and it's high. I wondered whether one of the risk owners could actually explain a little bit more about what work is underpinning addressing this risk. And I wonder whether it's something that we all need to be more conscious of, because it's multi-agency and it will run through many areas of the council's work. And it's obviously a significant issue, both for the people involved being made homeless and also for us providing accommodation and all the logistical challenges that will involve.
Thank you. Are you happy to take that away?
Certainly.
Fantastic. Sorry.
I think they might mean December 2023.
Yes, perhaps, yes. A good spot. Yeah, just check the December 2024 date has crept in there.
It's in a couple of places. It's easily done.
Yeah. Particularly at this time of year. Any final comments or questions on this risk register? Thank you. So we've been asked to review the register and make any comments or suggestions. Thank you for your input on that, members, and thank you, Mr. Bird, for presenting the report. Thank you. We come to item 8, which is the performance report for Treasury Management for the third quarter. I understand Mr. Maddock will be presenting this report.
Thank you. So this is the third quarter report up to the end of December. You'll see at paragraph 17 we have a table that shows our investments. So the top half of the table looks at our sort of counterparty investments with banks, building societies, etc. And the second part looks at our longer term investments, which incidentally haven't changed in the 3 quarters so far of this financial year. You'll also see that paragraph 28, you'll see some information on our borrowing. You'll see our borrowing has actually gone down since the start of the year. So it was at 245 million. It's now at it was at 234 million at the end of December. There's also a table showing some of the key budgets that relate to Treasury Management and how they've performed. And overall, it looks like we're going to be about 82,000 underspent or additional income, depending on which one you look at. That's positive news. There's also some commentary on our borrowing, the counterparties we're lending to, the counterparties we're borrowing from, and there's also some sort of macro type commentary which is provided by Link, our Treasury advisors. So that's the quarterly position as of the end of December. Any questions on that in particular?
Thank you, Mr. Maddock. Any questions or comments on this report? Councillor Heather Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to see the borrowing going down. Most people know I'm not keen on debt. It does what, and I can understand. I can see the interest rates, and I can understand that short term is less than long term. So I understand why it's being done, but I feel I have to raise my concerns about the whole refinancing of short term for what is essentially long term borrowing. And I appreciate why it's being used, but I'm very concerned about at some point we'll get caught out. And so I've said it before. I couldn't sit here and not say it because it's what I believe, but I do understand why it's being done.
Thank you, Councillor Heather Williams. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Mr. Maddock? I mean, I see that our short-term borrowing, as Councillor Williams has indicated, has reduced now to.
Yeah, I mean, there were two reasons that we pursued short-term borrowing. Is that certainly in recent years it's been a lot cheaper than longer-term borrowing, but also the fact that our cash flow projections did suggest that we needed some borrowing for a shorter period of time than perhaps. So, you know, our borrowing has gone up and down. It's been actually quite volatile over the last couple of years. So I take on board the comments that Councillor Williams makes. I mean, there's always a risk that we might need to borrow at a time when rates are higher. It's difficult to predict exactly when we're going to need to borrow and at what rate we're going to be able to borrow on. But on balance, talking to our Treasury advisors, looking at the cash that we hold, in our opinion, it's been best to borrow short term on the basis that we probably, you know, we were looking like we didn't need all of that money for the long term anyway, and that at the time and still currently shorter term rates are slightly better. It's not such a big differential as it was. There was a period when there was a really big differential between short and longer term. So I think that's probably all I need to say on that, really.
If I'm reading these tables correctly, then actually, as at the end of December, our short-term borrowing at 29 million was very similar, in fact, to our short-term investments at 27 million. So presumably, in the event of some kind of sudden sort of short-term interest rate shock, we could, seek to wind down both sides of that balance and so reduce our exposure.
And and that's the thing. We sort of manage both of them in tandem, if you like, looking at which is the best option. Our investments, I think, are probably coming down at the moment because the last quarter of the year there tends to be more expenditure than in the first 3 quarters. But obviously that'll be subject to the outturn report in the summer.
Thank you. There might be some way of presenting the short-term debt and investments and the long-term debt and investments together. I appreciate this is a kind of two-dimensional, sort of 2x2 dimensional issue, so whether you look at just the investments and just the debt, or whether you look at it in terms of maturities. But I wonder if there's some way we can bring that together in some summary, just so councillors and members of the public can see the kind of the net short run and the net long run picture, if that makes sense. Councillor Stobart, thank you.
Chair, your comment was very apt, because I was going to ask the same question. If we were to compose, and I'm reluctantly using the term dashboard. It's a very modern term, but if we were to look at a number of parameters, and maybe some of them, because this is a complex activity, are more complex than simply like flashing red lights and things. But what would be a set of reasonable data that we could just quickly assess, and even touching on the point that Councillor Williams made about the overall borrowing, something that would allow us, and perhaps it's a paragraph or a picture on the front page of the performance report, which just summed up those main points. I noticed, for example, the overall return, the blended return, is sort of hidden away in paragraph 21, but that's an important piece of data. And there's a lot about this document, which is, yes, it's, you know, the data is there, but it just takes some extracting, as you just demonstrated with the short-term questions. So I'd simply ask for a consideration of that, you know, a clear presentation of the key things that would then perhaps provide a springboard into investigating some other stuff. I would particularly like to pick up on paragraph 49, though, the external Treasury Management Advisor, and ask a simple question: how's that relationship going? When we talk about the Treasury Management Advisor, is that one individual or a company or a group of individuals? How does it work, and how do we validate their advice, for example, and you know, continue to maintain a good working relationship?
Yeah, so thank you for so our Treasury advisors are called Link, so they're an organisation based in London. I think a number of authorities use them. A lot of their work is around collating information from various counterparties and various sources and providing a sort of overall view based on a number of factors. But equally, we also get information from other sources as well. So whilst they provide sort of higher level advice, not necessarily the full detail, but you know, we have a fairly good relationship with them. We meet with them probably every other month, maybe quarterly, depending on, and if there's something significant coming up, then we would have a sort of special meeting for that particular topic. So, for example, we're going to be needing to borrow some more money for our housing revenue account. So we've had an initial meeting with them about the best borrowing strategy. Now, it's not completely straightforward. Do we borrow it all in one lump, or do we borrow it in stages? So you know, they would advise on around the best strategy for that and who the best counterparties would be. So they provide a lot of the advice, but we don't solely go on information they provide. We do have other sources of information that do sort of act as a bit of a check and balance, or whatever the phrase is, to what they're telling us.
Thank you. Yes, and perhaps Mr. Maddock, you and I can take away the issue of, as you say, I'm also reluctant to invoke the dashboard, the dreaded dashboard word, but I think there might be some way of pulling out some key, some kind of key information. Because, you know, I mean, even simple things like the fact that, you know, this council continues to enjoy kind of, you know, net investment income in excess of £5 million a year, and what an amazing difference that makes to this council and our residents, is in danger of getting buried beneath, you know, other important information. I'm going to make my usual comment about the risk profile of perhaps certain local authorities that we might have deemed to be very low risk in the past, but obviously we're aware that you know, there are significant issues across the kind of local authority sector, and just to check again that that is being reflected in the kind of the risk premiums that we're sort of that we are charging when we're investing in other local authorities. But I'll leave you to discuss that with our Treasury advisors in their somewhat sort of matchmaking efforts between as we all shuffle money around. Sorry, Councillor Sanford.
Cheshire East jumped out at me. I think they have difficulties. They borrowed in anticipation of money from HS2 that's not now going to arrive, so maybe that is one you could look at in particular. I may have misremembered that. Grateful if you could check.
Thank you. I will check into that, because I wasn't particularly aware of that one, so yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions about the Treasury management performance? No, well, thank you very much to Mr. Maddock for presenting the report and for your ongoing work in this area. We've been asked to review and comment, and we have done so. If we could have the quarter, I guess the quarter 4 update will be to the end of March. Well, I guess it'll be a kind of whole year summary at that point. If it's possible to have that for our sort of hypothetical meeting in late May, I think that would be ideal, but I appreciate there is a bit of work involved. So
Should be able to.
that would be good to review them as timely as possible. Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Agenda item 9 is asks the committee to approve the council's current Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act as laid out in the appendix of the report, and to note the use of these powers since the committee last met. Can I ask Mr. Murphy, our monitoring officer, who joins us online, to please present this report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members and officers. A very short report, just asking you to approve the Council's RIPA policy as set out in Appendix A. There is no substantive change to it, save for my details have now replaced those of the previous monitoring officer, Mr. McKenna. And to note that during the period December 2023 to February 2024, the Council made no use of RIPA powers available to it. Chair, save for a typo in paragraph 7, when it should read the last reviewed the policy in March 2023, this time last year. That's all I propose to say. If there are any questions, I'll be of assistance.
Thank you. So we're required to approve our policy on an annual basis, so that's why it's come to the committee today. Are there any comments or questions before I move to the recommendations? Councillor Stobart.
Thank you, Chair. So I remember we went through a series of questions this time last year, or more or less this time last year, about what these regulations meant for this committee, and if those powers were to be invoked for something, just how we would continue to be involved, what's expected of us in terms of our oversight. But just a few general things. I think I'm not sure it's our business, but let me ask the question anyway. What are the kinds of circumstances under which this mechanism would be, in a sense, activated? I was just interested in a few examples so that we were at least aware of what the council might do and where this set of rules would apply. And then beyond that, these are, if you will, unusual situations, and are the teams, the mechanisms, the equipment, is that in a state of readiness? Needs to be called up in a moment. Something gets done, some information gets gathered, and then it's shut down again. So are the staff ready and trained? And is the governance process, in a sense, stress tested for that occasional use? This is like, being called out, I guess, as firemen, firewomen. You've got to be ready, the equipment's got to be ready, and you've got to be able to act. So just a few general questions about the process and how it works.
Thank you, Councillor Stobart. Sorry, Councillor Williams, you wanted to come in on this point.
Yes, just because I appreciate in the last year or so there has a bit. Previously, we did have to use it quite a lot in relation to fly tipping hotspots. Was the staple that we used it quite a bit in. I don't think that's been sort of used in, but the protocols itself were very robust. We were very happy as a committee when they were more commonly in practice, in my view. I don't know about the technology, but I'm just sort of conscious, obviously, the last time it was used is probably before Mr. Murphy joined us as well. So I look around the room, I'm probably actually the last as well. Me and Jonathan and Patrick. Patrick were here, weren't we? But yes, it's something that, to be honest, I would like to see it used more, particularly in relation to fly tipping. I think it was Cottenham, it used to get used quite for that little hotspot, and it did deliver results. So also don't find the cameras and take them down first.
Thank you. That's a very helpful and colourful example for us to illustrate the potential use of this. Mr. Murphy, did you want to add anything?
Not at length, Chair. Thank you for the questions and thank you for Councillor Williams. I suppose coming back to Councillor Stobart's question about examples, it's hard for me to say because we don't have any use. All I would say, of course, this is fundamentally an intelligence-driven power. So there would be that response through officers and an assessment, with some legal input before we would go down the judicial process, which is the RIPA process. So I'm confident, and noting Councillor Williams' helpful remarks, that the right people are in the right places and know what to do if it comes in, or if we felt need, based on intelligence, to take it forward. Yeah, no, I have nothing further to say beyond that.
Thank you. Has that adequately answered your question, Councillor Stone?
It does, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this? Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Chair. I just refer to paragraph 17 of the policy training. It says there will be an ongoing training programme for council officers. Can I ask for reassurance that there is an active training programme for council officers who need to be aware of this impact, please?
Thank you. Mr. Murphy?
Yes, to the best of my knowledge, there is. I will double check that and come back to Councillor Sanford this week to confirm.
Thank you.
Thank you. If that's all, we've been asked to approve the Council's RIPA policy with one typo as at Appendix A. Oh, sorry, Councillor Stobart.
So just one thing, and this may be just a point of clarification, paragraph 1.5, the Chief Executive is the Senior Responsible Officer, but Appendix 1, Senior Responsible Officer is Anne Ainsworth, Chief Operating Officer. So there seems to be a small anomaly.
That's a good spot. Who is intended to be the Senior Responsible Officer?
My understanding was it was the Chief Exec, but again, Councillor Stobart, thank you for bringing that to my attention. I will go away, double check and revert back to this committee with an update.
Councillor Williams?
We did used to have two to cover in absences, so I don't know whether that's part of the anomaly, but we always used to have two appointed people because it used to be the Chief Executive and Environment Officer. That was quite some time ago. Yes, that might, either or I'm happy with, Chair.
Yes,
or
thank
both.
you. Or both. In that case, yes, if we can, we will delegate to Mr. Murphy to update the Senior Responsible Officers as appropriate. Beyond that, are we happy to approve the Council's RIPA policy as at Appendix A in this report? Thank you very much. We've been asked to note that we have not used RIPA surveillance powers between December 2023 and February 2024. Thank you very much, Mr. Murphy. If you could circulate an updated and final policy with those changes when you have it, that would be much appreciated.
Thank you, Chair. Will do.
Thank you. Agenda item 10, matters of topical interest. Does anybody have any additional matters they wish to raise that have not otherwise been covered at the meeting today? I think the first item was more or less matters of topical interest in any case, so fairly wide-ranging discussion then. Thank you. So the date of the next meeting is scheduled towards the end of July, but there will be an additional meeting, we think, in the second half of May to approve, now let me get this right, to approve the 22-23 accounts. And hopefully we will also do Treasury Management Q4, and potentially one or two other bits and pieces as well. Thank you very much. I declare the meeting closed.